Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the latest Women in Tech Birmingham event. We're really excited about this one. We think it's going to be great. We hope you enjoy it. A little bit of, housekeeping to start with. For all our events, we want to make sure that it's a welcoming and a safe space for everybody and no one feels alienated. So we always ask people to abide by our code of conduct. Basically, the code of conduct just says we won't tolerate any kind of disrespectful language or harmful language relating to age, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, anything. So if you have any concerns about that, if you think that someone has said something inappropriate, please reach out to one of us, to me, the organizer, or you can contact us on social media, on any of our social media accounts if you want to. So we're really excited this evening. We're going to be hearing from Kathryn Lupin. She is wonderful. She's great. She's a delivery manager for Citizens Advice. Is that correct?
That is correct. Hello. Cool. I'll just share my screen and we can get started. Sorry, it's not Zoom. Zoom is what I'm used to.
Don't worry about it.
Cool. Hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint now then. So de-jargonising Agile, or in slightly simpler terms, what is Agile and how does it work? So I'm Kathryn Lupin, like Joe said. I'm really happy to be here this evening to talk to you about de-jargonising Agile. Couple of really quick housekeeping things from me. Number one, me and my spouse picked up a puppy last week. So if you hear any playful yelping in the background, I do apologise. We're still working out where you can't hear her. And secondly, there'll be time for questions at the end. So please just hold on to them. We'll put them in the comments and we'll get to them at the end. So to kick off, just a little bit about me. Who am I? Why do I care about Agile? Well, like Joe said, I'm a delivery manager for Citizens Advice. I work with the learning team there to make sure that we're delivering on time, working in an agile way, to create learning that advisors in your local CA office use to give advice to the public. Before that, I was a scrum master at a software company for 2 years. So again, I was making sure that my team was being agile, helping to make sure that new features got added to products. And my job before that was the one that sent me to train as a scrum master. So I am actually a certified scrum master. I got a certificate and everything. I also founded and ran Scrum Master Meetup Birmingham, which was a meetup group for 3 years. So you could say that I'm pretty invested in Agile as a methodology. And just to get the de-jargonising started early, a Scrum Master, I appreciate I said that about 5 times just. Scrum Master is someone who works in an Agile team using the Scrum framework, who makes sure the team is working in an Agile way. Talk a little bit about frameworks later, but all of this to say you're in good hands, will be great. So for the last 4 years, firstly being a Scrum Master and then being a delivery manager who's responsible for making us work in Agile, whenever I explain my job to people, even sometimes the people that I work with, the most frequent response I get is, "Oh, I could never." And usually at that point, all I've said is, "Hi, I'm Kat, and a big part of my job is making sure we're doing Agile." So if you're feeling like that, if you hear the word Agile and your brain just refuses to go any further, you're in the right place. So Agile, the origin story, where did it come from? Where did it come from? Well, Agile originated in the 80s in the tech industry. And since then, it started to filter out of the tech industry. So once it hit critical mass in tech, it started to become a thing that tech companies wanted their HR departments to work in an agile way because all of their developers work in an agile way. And if it helped the developers, why couldn't it help HR? So agile HR kind of became a thing. HR departments talk to each other. And now companies outside of the tech industry are using agile So it's not just in tech anymore, but it is quite widespread in tech. But it's really helpful to a lot of companies for loads of different reasons. And because of that, it's started to become a buzzword. So people who don't fully understand it will think that it can fix everything that's wrong in their company, and they go, right, we're going agile. But why is it so difficult for people to understand what agile is? Well, I'm going to put the blame squarely onto jargon. So the tech industry has a habit of making everything quite jargony. There's so many examples of words where you're like, what is this? Like the cloud. I don't understand the cloud. And then someone told me that it's an online digital storage space. And I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. But the 10 people who just said the cloud to me, like I should understand it before explaining it, really didn't help. And when it comes to agile, I know what agile is, as I've explained. And yet I've met people who call themselves agile evangelists, and they just seem to speak in code. And I'm meant to know what they're talking about. So when you're in tech, just a lot of jargon gets thrown around, and particularly around agile. I did it 2 slides ago. I had to explain what Scrum Master was, even though I'd already said it a few times. In my last job, I was a Scrum Master. Like I said, that's someone who works in the Scrum framework, helps their team work in an agile way. But I worked there for 2 years, and not once did I meet someone who knew what Scrum Master meant from the start. Maybe my boss. No one else. I actually got a lot of rugby jokes, which would have gone a lot better if I knew anything about rugby. I might have learned from the jokes, but at the start, I had no idea. I promised to de-jargonize Agile, and the way that I'm going to do that, or at least the way that I simplify jargon, is explain it to me like I'm 5. I'm a big fan of the idea of explain it to me like I'm 5. Shorthand for I don't know a lot about this, please simplify so I can follow. I picked it up when I started in tech. I don't have a techie background. I did a German degree. I know nothing. I know some things now, but when I started, absolutely nothing. So when I first started a software company, developers would talk to me about what they were doing, and I just wouldn't understand. Explain it to me like I'm 5 turns, I'm using this API to access a token on this site, into I'm writing code to get this info from that website. Completely removes the jargon, doesn't talk down to you, and it just makes it a lot easier to understand when you're not a specialist or have never had contact with that idea. So Agile. It's a way of running projects that means you create a basic version of your product first, you get feedback, and then you improve on the basic version. And then you keep doing that. That's really all it is. Like I said, it's been around since the 80s. And because of that, a lot of people have tried to codify it. They've put in frameworks. I know I've mentioned them. I will come on to them in a little bit. But there's also a whole Agile manifesto. I'm not going to take you through it. The Agile manifesto is very squarely seated in the tech industry, but you don't need to know or understand the manifesto to do Agile. But there are 4 values that are quite useful for trying to understand how Agile works, why it is the way it is, why do you take a small part, deliver that, get feedback, build on it. So these are the 4 values. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So to go through those individually, individuals and interactions over processes and tools means you value the people that you work with, your end users, anyone involved who's got opinions over this is how we've always done it, this is how we're going to do it, these are the softwares that we use, this is the technology that we use, and that's never going to change. Rather than going, this is how it is, we look at people and how we're using creating content, how people are using what we're creating, and improve how we're working. Working software over comprehensive documentation means it's much better to get something out there that your end user can actually use, rather than going, here's a really pretty guidance document that's 50 pages long, but the thing doesn't actually do what you want it to do. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. If you can work with your end users, it's much more fruitful, it's much more beneficial than arguing over your contracts. And then finally, responding to change over following a plan. Now, I love a plan. This one is a really big one for me, though. So rather than going, here is the plan, we're going to do this, it's going to take a year, it's going to be amazing, and then you get halfway through the project and, I don't know, the bottom falls out of the market for it, and you just keep going because you're like, it's going to pick up, and it doesn't. You look at stuff like that, you look at feedback, and you change your plan. Or you have a short-term plan and then you lay the train tracks just as the train's going to them. So those are the values. What does it look like in practice? So if you've ever tried to look into Agile before, you might have seen this kind of diagram. When I first started working in Agile, it took me a really long time to understand this because all of the versions that I had just had jargon on, and I had to go away and look at what the jargon was and then understand how it worked with this icon. So hopefully what does it look like in practice? Makes sense. So you start with the product that you want to make. Could be anything, learning content, whatever it is that you produce. I'm going to use the example of an Organize Your Life app. As I talk through it, the big thing we want to get out is an app that lets you write to-do lists, houses your calendar, sends you birthday and anniversary reminders, tracks your medication. That's what we really want to create. So you take that, and you break it down into the components of it. So itself, all of those features, we separate them out. So one feature would be to-do list, one would be the tracking medication, one would be the calendar, etc., etc. And you could break it down even further. Like I said, not a tech person, not entirely sure exactly how much coding would go into each of those, but you could break them down even further into maybe have a main menu and a login page. So once you've broken it down, you look at all of those smallest versions and you go, what is the most basic version released that we need to create so our end users can look at it, can start using it? That's what I've called the most basic version. And then you work on that for a set amount of time. So often you'll hear people working in 2 weeks or a month. The idea is that it's quite a short set amount of time. And during that time, you have a regular talk with your teammates to make sure that there aren't any problems. And if there are any problems, you can fix them. So when you've worked on it for the set amount of time, you deliver that most basic version, and then you get feedback from your end users. You also get feedback from your teammates on how that process has gone. Is there can do something about it before they crop up next time? All of that kind of stuff. So that's your average Agile cycle. Create a most basic version, deliver it to your end users, get feedback, and when the feedback comes in, you feed that back into either your products that you want to make or the breakdown of components, or both. And you keep iterating. You just keep working through that process, getting feedback, improvement, feedback, improvement. That's the process de-jargonized. What does it look like with jargon? How it works without jargon, so you can understand it and get to grips with it. But when you go out into the tech industry, people will use jargon. So how does what I just said fit in with jargon that you might have heard? So what's your big idea? The products you want to make, that would be your product backlog. You could have multiple products in there. So obviously I said big idea, this one app. Most places are going to have more than one thing that they want to get delivered. So that would go in there. Breaking it down into its smallest components, that's the sprint backlog. Not intuitive what that is if you don't know what a sprint is. So that's, like I said, that's the list of your components broken down to their smallest parts. The most basic version that you're going to deliver is usually one feature. Take that feature, you work on it for a set amount of time. Your set amount of time is called a sprint. You've probably heard about sprints if you've heard about Agile. It's kind of the calling cards that everyone kind of latches onto, but it is just set amount of time that you're working on something for. Those daily check-ins with your team, fairly often they're called stand-ups. Different frameworks will call them different things. So if you work in Scrum, there'll be daily Scrum meetings. generically often called stand-ups because they're only meant to be quite short. And if you have everyone standing, your meeting's not going to be very long. And then the delivery of that most basic version, or MVP. That is quite understandable, except in my experience, people latch on to MVP and then just say MVP all the time. And if you don't know what that stands for, that gets very confusing very quickly. And then obviously feedback is feedback. You can have that in different ways, but feedback's not really a jargon word. So that's what it looks like with jargon. So I've talked about frameworks. I've mentioned Scrum quite a lot, and that's because Scrum is the one framework that I've most worked in. But there are tons of Agile frameworks. Like I said, Agile's been around since the 80s. It's been around for a really long time, and people have tried to enact the cycle that I just talked through, that working on a basic version, delivering it, getting feedback, improvement, that cycle in lots of different ways. And people like to go, here's the way that we're going to do it. Kanban and Scrum are the ones that you're most likely to hear about. If they're often considered the two that are easiest to get a company going on if they're not already in Agile. The Spotify model was created by Spotify, as in the music streaming service. But interestingly enough, they don't use Spotify model anymore. So the Spotify model is a specific way of doing that cycle that I just talked about. But in that feedback bit, where you talk about feedback from your team, how has it gone? Spotify have used that feedback to evolve out of the Spotify model because they're constantly improving how they work. And then the Toyota production system is based on how Toyota makes cars. If you Google Agile frameworks, you'll get loads of results. So I wanted to double check that I'd catalyze safe. That's when you've got everyone in the company working in an Agile way, and it all feeds into one another. But when I Googled that to make sure that I'd got capitals in the right place, the very top result was a list of 42 Agile methodologies. I'm not going to talk you through how each of these work. I don't have enough time to talk you through 42 Agile methodologies, and frankly, I doubt you'd want to listen to that. But I don't need to explain how these work because all of them work on this cycle. If you can understand this cycle, if you can get all these bits work together, that's it. That's how Agile works. So I'm going to take you through an example of work that we've done recently. So like I said, I work for Citizens Advice. We are not a tech company, we are a charity. So the piece of work that we were working on was our Essential Information Questions booklet. It's a reference guide for advisors. And we knew that it needed to be updated in formats because originally it was a booklet, a printable booklet, about 62 pages long, which used to be fine because before the pandemic, people used meetings. However, now there's a lot more web chat, there's a lot more phone calls, there's a lot more video chat, and using a 62-page document that's on its side because it's optimized for printing isn't helpful. Not everyone has a printer, and even those who do have printers don't necessarily want to print 62 pages. So we were going to update the format, make it more usable online. And we also had a couple of questions that were quite specific to being face-to-face with someone who needed advice. And obviously channels, web chat, phone, video call being used more and more because of the pandemic. We wanted to make sure that our questions were more channel neutral. So the first thing we did was update the format so people could get going, get using it, start using it online. We worked on it, I think it was for 2 weeks. And in that time we had daily check-ins. So in our team, we call them check-ins. We agreed as a team that stand-ups was ableist language, so we don't use it. We call them check-ins. And then we delivered that Google Doc version and waited for feedback to come in. While we were waiting for feedback to come in, we started updating those face-to-face questions, making them more channel neutral. Again, we worked on them for, I think it was 2 weeks, had daily check-ins, made sure that we solved any problems that were occurring. So, for example, in this bit, we had to work with another team, and we had to make sure that we had communication with them. And then we did that. While we were working on it, we had feedback on the formats. So some people didn't want to use the essential information questions booklet online. They wanted to print it. They wanted 62 pages. Excuse me. So we added to our breakdown of features that we wanted to give people an option of formats. So once we delivered those up-to-date face-to-face questions, we then started working on giving an option of formats. So we were going to give a Google Doc version, people who wanted to use it online, and we were going to give a printable version, people who wanted to print it. Then we worked on that for a week. And in that time did our daily check-ins, and at the end we delivered those options and waited for feedback. As of right now, the only feedback we've had is positive, people saying that they really like having the option. So as of right now, we're not doing any more on that. And as and when we get feedback or we get information from other teams that mean it needs to be updated, we'll start working on it then. But the things that we had planned got done, and then some more stuff got done because of that. So looking at the values as part of that example, if we look at individuals' interactions over processes and tools, for us in that example, it manifests as us listening to that feedback on the option of formats. We'd had feedback saying that people wanted to use it online, and that's why we were doing that work in the first place. But then we got more information, more feedback saying that people wanted an option. So that's what we did. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So rather than spend people how to use something online or to just use the Google Doc version, we just created those multiple versions so that people could use whichever one suited them. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation isn't quite applicable to us. We are a charity, so that one doesn't quite fit for us. But obviously, if you're in a for-profit company, then that one will be useful. And then finally, the big one, responding to change over following a plan. My plan was that we were going to change the format. We were done. We'd move on to something else. But based on the feedback we got, we changed that plan. We responded to the fact that people wanted multiple options. And we had never intended to give an option. I think originally there was been one version and then we changed it. And obviously, as soon as we got feedback going that needed to change, people wanted options, that's what we did. So we were responding to the change over following a plan. So that was a walkthrough of De-jargonising Agile. Hopefully that's made sense. And the cycle has made sense to you now. Maybe you can link it to some of the jargon. So if anyone comes up to you, wants to talk to you about sprints, you know that means the set amount of time you're going to work on something for. But I really hope this has been helpful. Please go forth and Agile if you want to. We're going to take questions now, but if you don't get your question answered or you've got anything else that you want to talk to me about Agile, at Kathryn_Lupin. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can come back to questions. Joe, you're muted.
Just realised, my mic was muted. Again, every time something tech related doesn't work, someone makes a silly mistake like leaving their mic muted. Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. Like, I'd worked in companies that used Agile before, and I kind of like had this kind of vague understanding of what it was, and I'd like heard all the jargon. But yeah, that was really great. Thank you. So, questions. Yeah, so Becky Floyd, I think you've sort of asked this one, but I don't know if you might want to go into a bit more detail. Becky Floyd has asked, what does Scrum framework mean?
Yeah, so like I talked about, there are loads of different frameworks. Scrum's just the one that I've worked in most I've no idea why it's called Scrum. It doesn't stand for anything, but I think the hallmarks of it are that you have those daily check-ins, daily scrums, and then in that feedback, there's a meeting called retrospective, which is where you get feedback from your team on how it's gone. So that's solidified's not the right word, but it's built in to the way that you work. So yeah, that's what Scrum Framework means.
So other frameworks might not have that team retrospective.
Yeah, so there'll still be ways to get feedback, but they might be different ways. Some to Alyssa or a list of 42, some of those were very similar. But yeah, it's different frameworks will encapsulate that feedback in different ways, but Scrum is just the one that I know best.
Cool, thank you. And we have another question from Passionless Pointless. They say, what's the best course or the best way to become a Scrum Master, and how long does it take to get the qualification?
So I'm certified with Scrum Alliance, who are the biggest non-profit Scrum related company. Lost the end of that, but they're well recognized in doing qualifications. They have various courses. I think if you search Certified Scrum Master, Scrum Alliance, you'll see all their different options. It's a 3-day course. It's the one that I did. There's an open book test at the end, but essentially you spend 2 to 3 days learning about Scrum, trying it out, and then you do an open book test at the end. And then you two can go forth on Agile.
That's great. As a sort of like, this is more sort of, I think it might be interesting. Would you mind talking a bit like how you got into what you're doing, like how you got into Scrum?
Yeah, sure. So I was working at my first job out of university, and I was managing 11 people, which was quite a lot for a 23-year-old who'd never managed anyone before. And what they sent me on was a Scrum Master course.
I think we might have lost her.
Thing.
Sorry, you just broke up.
I wasn't sure if I had. I don't know where I broke out. I'll start again. I was managing 11 people. First job out of uni, never managed anyone, asked for managing training, and they sent me on a Scrum Master course. So it's not management training. Don't do that. If you're trying to send someone on a management course, don't send them on Scrum Master training. It is only useful if you then want to work in an Agile way in the Scrum framework. But we were working in, so a traditional project methodology is called Waterfall. That's where you make a plan at the start and then you work on it for 6 months to a year, 2 years. The plan doesn't change and you just work on it, and then you get to the end and it's not quite what the client wanted. And it just, learning about Agile and Scrum just made a lot of sense to me. Particularly the responding to change area following a plan. It's not in my nature to do that, but I really see the benefits of it and have seen the benefits of it. That's how I got into it. And then I left that job and went and was a Scrum Master for somewhere actually using Agile.
Cool, that's great, thank you. Another question from Passionless Pointless said, what's your favourite thing about your job?
Solving problems. Because I'm the delivery manager, I am not just helping people work Agile way, it's also making sure we deliver on time. So a lot of my job is making sure that we can fix problems and solve problems. And I really like that. It makes me feel like I'm contributing to the team. One thing that the Agile side has really helped is I introduced retrospectives. Like I said, that's where you get feedback from your team, and it's really improved the way that we're working and we work with other teams. I just really love that problem solving.
Oh, that's great. This one's more a comment, but from Becky Floyd again. She said EIQ is much better now, it's a Google Doc, but you're right, some volunteers prefer to have a hard copy.
Yeah,
I can understand that.
Yeah, we had that feedback, which is why there's the option now.
Yeah. And she's also asked, do you think a standardized case sheet would be useful for quality purposes?
In the EIQ, possibly. I don't think that I know enough right this second to answer that. But clearly you work for CA, Becky. If you want to get in touch with us through the usual channels, we can pick that up at work.
I sort of wanted to ask as well, because you talked about being a delivery manager, obviously that differs slightly from just being a scrum master. Are there sort of a lot of jobs with a kind of slightly different title that's like slightly different job description, but is essentially a scrum master or just an agile team leader, or I don't know what else you'd call it?
Yeah, I think so. When I was looking to leave my last job as a scrum master, I looked at all different kinds of job titles. When I first came across delivery manager, I didn't entirely know what that entailed. So in my extensive Googling, it tends to be if you work for a charity or a government body, they call what I would consider an agile team lead to be delivery manager. But yeah, there's the scrum master, there's like agile team lead, there's agile manager. Really, it comes down to looking at the job description and seeing if it sounds like it's just going help people work in an agile way, because that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. And do you think, I think I know slightly before, I think when you were planning the talk, you'd asked people on social media, like, what would they want to hear about? What would they want to learn about? And I think there was some comment about like what kind of teams or work that Agile really helps with. Is there a kind of work or a size of team or that really works with Agile, or is it kind of applicable to everything?
I would say it's fairly applicable to everything. I would say that, but I do genuinely think it is. I know some people do think that Waterfall is better for certain projects, but when I asked them what kind of projects, I never really got an answer. For me, it just getting a standard or a basic version out to clients to then get feedback on to improve and improve just seems to me to be the best way to do projects. Like I said, in my first job, we would work on something for 6 months to a year, and then we would deliver it, and it was never right at the end. We would deliver to the specifications we'd been given at the very beginning, but in that 6 months to a year, the clients would go away and think about it and slightly change what they actually wanted. And it was 6 months to a year later, we'd already done all that work. What were they then going to pay for us to do more work on it if they wanted us to change it? And I just think that Agile really gives you the ability to pivot and to respond to changes as needed, which is just really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it makes sense to me. Like, in what way would a business needs or like wants or their prime focuses not change over a year?
Yeah.
That's such a long time.
I mean, look at the last year. Everything that we started in January and February, we had to pivot on by March. Like, I mean, hopefully, touch wood, there won't be another pandemic. But just we had to change so many things. And if we'd been in a waterfall methodology, it would have been awful. There would have been so much work involved in changing it. But as it was, we could pivot and move around really easily what we were doing.
Yeah. And I think I know, having sort of done interviews and stuff and speaking to other tech companies, that I imagine in a tech environment, it would be quite useful, because if you're dealing with a company or a client that doesn't really understand tech, they might not really know what they want. So they might tell you what they want, and then you give them exactly what they've said, but they're kind of going, no, that's not what we wanted. What did you do that for?
Exactly.
So if you haven't spent 12 months on that project,
it's much easier to take when they go, no, that's completely wrong, if you've only done like a month on it, rather than 12. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've got. We had several comments just saying thank you for a great talk. And from Women in Tech, I'd like to extend thanks as well. It was really great. It was a pleasure to have you on. For everyone watching now or watching later on, yeah, feel free to, I'm sure if you want to ask questions, Kathryn will be really happy to take those on her social media, which is it's linked below. For us, please follow us on our social medias. If you have any kind of comments yourself about this event or about ideas that you've got for a future event, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear it. So all that remains is to hope that everyone has a very good weekend, I should say. It's near the end of the week, isn't it? Very good weekend. Thanks very much for joining us, guys.
Bye.